The Barons Fall. The 5th of September, 1940. Kent, England. Oberleutnant Franz von Werra watches the patchwork fields of Kent rush up to meet him. His Messerschmitt Bf 109, crippled in a dogfight over southern England, is failing fast. Black smoke pours from the engine, the cockpit reeking of burning oil and scorched metal. He has perhaps 30 seconds before impact. Von Werra pulls back on the stick, fighting to level the dying aircraft. The controls respond sluggishly. Below, a farmer's field spreads green and impossibly close. He braces. The wheels touch earth with a violent shudder. The Messerschmitt bounces once, twice, then plows through soft soil, tearing a brown scar across the pastoral landscape. The propeller screams against dirt before the engine dies. Silence rushes in, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and von Werra's ragged breathing. He unbuckles, throws back the canopy, and climbs onto the wing, legs trembling from adrenaline. At 27, he is a decorated pilot with Jagdgeschwader 3, credited with 8 confirmed kills. Today makes him something else entirely, a prisoner. The thought arrives with cold clarity as figures emerge from a nearby army barracks. British soldiers run toward him across the field. At their head, incongruously, runs an unarmed cook in a white apron, brandishing a carving knife. Von Werra might have laughed in other circumstances. Instead, he raises his hands. The cook reaches him first, breathless and wide-eyed, pointing the knife with theatrical menace. The soldiers arrive moments later, rifles ready, faces hard with the knowledge that this German pilot helped bomb their cities. Von Werra meets their stares, his mind not on defeat. A single conviction burns through the shock of capture. This is not the end. It is merely a tactical repositioning. The war has shifted theaters, from air to ground, from combat to escape. He is already planning. Within hours, von Werra finds himself in the back of a military lorry, hands bound, heading north toward London. 2 guards sit across from him, Lee Enfield rifles on their laps, watching him with the wary attention reserved for dangerous animals. The flamboyant Luftwaffe officer, who painted a caricature of himself on his aircraft and wore his Iron Cross with rakish pride, now sits in silence. But his eyes move constantly, noting routes, memorizing landmarks, calculating distances. The lorry passes through towns where rubble still smolders from recent bombing raids. Civilians turn to stare, their expressions ranging from curiosity to naked hatred. Von Werra's jaw tightens. He understands he represents the enemy incarnate, a symbol of the Luftwaffe terror raining down on Britain nightly. The guards see this too, their fingers resting near triggers. After 3 days of interrogation in London, where British intelligence officers probed for information about Luftwaffe tactics, von Werra is transferred again, this time by train heading northwest toward a more permanent facility. The compartment is cramped. 4 guards accompany 6 German prisoners. The other 5 are bomber crew, shot down over different parts of England, bearing various injuries. A waist gunner nurses bandaged hands, a navigator's face is purple with bruising. They exchange minimal conversation, aware the guards understand some German. Von Werra studies the train's windows, doors, and corridor layout. One guard notices his attention and smirks. Escape from a moving train? Impossible. The British railway system is an island fortress. Where would a German pilot run? Every civilian would recognize the uniform. The guard's expression says it all without words. Von Werra returns his gaze calmly and files the assessment away. On the 7th of October 1940, von Werra arrives at Grisdale Hall in the Lake District. The requisitioned manor house has been converted into a prisoner of war camp for captured German officers. As the truck passes through gates topped with barbed wire, von Werra gets his first view of his new prison. The hall is elegant even in captivity, with stone walls and tall windows, but its beautiful grounds are enclosed by chain-link fencing and guard towers. British soldiers patrol with German shepherds. The camp holds approximately 100 German Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine officers. Inside, he is processed, fingerprinted, photographed, issued a POW registration number. The British are methodical and efficient. They confiscate his Iron Cross, his lighter bearing the Jagdgeschwader 3 insignia, and his flying gloves. A guard hands him a coarse blanket and a tin cup. He is assigned to a room with 3 other pilots. His roommates greet him with cautious interest. Hauptmann Hans Joachim Pöppel, shot down in August. Lieutenant Rudolf Henkel, captured after a forced landing like von Werra's own. Oberleutnant Heinz Schade, pulled from the channel more dead than alive. They share an unheated room with 4 bunks and a single small window overlooking the grounds. The walls weep moisture in the Lake District damp. At night, the cold seeps through blankets. Von Werra lies awake that first night, listening to Henkel's cough echo in the darkness, feeling the thin mattress offer no comfort against the wooden slats. Through the window, searchlights sweep the grounds in regular 30-second intervals, their beams overlapping at the corners. He sees no blind spots. The routine at Grisdale Hall is designed to break spirit through monotony. Morning roll call at 0700 hours in the courtyard, regardless of weather. The British commanding officer, a captain with a clipped moustache, calls names while prisoners stand in formation. The October rain falls in sheets, soaking their inadequate uniforms. No one moves or complains. To show weakness is to give the British satisfaction. After roll call comes breakfast, a thin porridge, ersatz coffee that tastes of burned grain, and a single slice of bread. Von Werra learns hunger is not dramatic starvation, but a persistent emptiness that gnaws at the edges of thought. The irregularly arriving Red Cross parcels, with their chocolate, tinned meat, and real coffee, are hoarded and traded like currency. Days blur into a pattern. Morning roll call, breakfast, work details or recreation, a lunch of watery soup, afternoon activities, a dinner often indistinguishable from lunch, evening roll call, and lights out at 2,200 hours. The British Guards maintain professional distance, neither friendly nor cruel. They are simply men doing a job. But von Werra notices variations. Some are conscientious, checking locks with rigid attention. Others grow complacent, going through motions. One corporal consistently arrives 3 minutes late to his shift. These observations accumulate in von Werra's mind like intelligence reports. Within Grisdale Hall's walls, a shadow hierarchy exists among the German prisoners. The senior ranking officer, Luftwaffe Major Klaus Junger, maintains discipline and serves as intermediary with the captors, negotiating for better rations and medical care. But beneath this official structure runs the current of an escape committee. It is not formally acknowledged, but universally understood. Certain prisoners meet in hushed groups. Plans are sketched and destroyed. Tools disappear from work details. Maps are memorized. Von Werra hears whispers of tunnel attempts, disguises, and forged documents. Most attempts fail before execution. Those that progress are typically discovered by guards who have seen every trick before. The British know the patterns. Yet von Werra's determination does not waver. During recreation, he walks the camp perimeter with studied casualness, noting where fence posts sit in softer earth and where guard patrols lag. His roommates watch with knowing expressions. They have seen this fierce resolve in new prisoners before. Usually, it fades as reality sets in. Grisdale Hall is remote. Reaching the fence means crossing 50 meters of open ground under searchlights. Getting beyond it means navigating the Lake District wilderness without supplies. Reaching the coast means traveling hundreds of kilometers through a nation on high alert. The logistics defeat imagination. But during his 3rd week, von Werra notices something. The camp holds pilots and naval officers, but new prisoners are regularly transferred from initial interrogation centers. These transfers occur via train. The same railway that brought von Werra north continues to other camps. Twice since his arrival, he has watched trucks depart with German prisoners for onward transfer to Windermere Station, where they board trains under guard. The British move POWs frequently to prevent escape committees from becoming too organized. Any prisoner might receive transfer orders with minimal notice. On the 6th of November 1940, von Werra's name appears on a transfer list. He and 12 other prisoners are to be relocated to a camp in Canada. The news brings mixed reactions. For some, Canada seems even more inescapable, an entire ocean away. Others welcome any change from Griesdale's damp monotony. Von Werra listens to their speculation with outward calm while his mind races. Canada. But first, a train journey. British guards will escort them to Liverpool, where a transport ship waits. The route means hours aboard a moving train, hours of potential opportunity. The impossible suddenly crystallizes into the merely improbable. That night, von Werra lies awake while his roommates sleep. Through the window, the searchlights continue their patient sweep as rain hammers the glass. He thinks of the journey ahead, the guards who will watch him, the locked compartments, and the windows that might or might not open. He thinks of the British countryside rushing past at speed and of the impossibility that every guard before him has accepted as absolute truth. No one escapes from a moving train. The conviction is universal, which means no one is truly prepared for someone who refuses to accept it. Von Werra's hands clench beneath the thin blanket. He is Luftwaffe. He is a pilot. He has survived being shot from the sky. Tomorrow begins a new phase of the war, his private war against locks, guards, and the certainty of his captors. The Baron has fallen, but the Baron is far from finished. And the guards boarding that train with him have no idea what one desperate German pilot is willing to attempt while traveling at 70 kilometers per hour through the English countryside. Chapter 2. Hell is a country club. The recapture stings worse than the original capture. Von Werra returns to Griesdale Hall on October 12th, 1940, muddy and exhausted, flanked by 2 British home guards who seem more amused than angry. The commandant, a thin-lipped colonel with a pencil mustache, meets him at the main entrance. There is no violence, no screaming, just a weary shake of the head and an escort back to his quarters. Other German officers watch through tall Victorian windows as von Werra trudges past manicured lawns that mock him with their peaceful greenery. Some prisoners nod in respect. Others turn away with the practiced indifference of men who have already surrendered in their minds. The punishment arrives the next morning. Von Werra expects solitary confinement or a beating behind closed doors. Instead, he loses his parole privileges. No more escorted walks through the Lake District countryside. No more gentleman's honor system. The irony burns. He traded 5 days of freedom for indefinite confinement within walls that do not even have the decency to look like a proper prison. The British call this camp a model facility. To von Werra, it is psychological warfare disguised as civility. Roll call happens twice daily on the gravel courtyard outside the mansion's south wing. At 0700 and 1800 hours, 140 German officers assemble in neat ranks while guards count heads. The guards wear clean uniforms and carry rifles they rarely point. The entire procedure feels like a school assembly, not a military operation. Von Werra stands in the third row, watching the commandant's aide check names against a roster. The November wind cuts across the courtyard, and he notices the patterns: guards rotating positions every 30 minutes, sergeants at the same corners, the counting officer always approaching from the east entrance. Predictable, comfortable patterns that men follow because no one has given them reason to change. After the morning roll call, prisoners disperse. Some attend language classes in the converted library or exercise in the gymnasium. As punishment for his escape, von Werra is assigned to potato peeling duty in the kitchen basement. He sits on a wooden stool for hours each morning, working through bushels of potatoes with a dull paring knife. The supervisor, a portly corporal named Henderson, reads yesterday's newspaper with casual disinterest as steam clouds the low ceiling. The monotony should drive von Werra mad, but instead, he watches. He counts the guards passing the kitchen entrance. He times the delivery trucks arriving at the rear loading dock. He notes that Henderson leaves his post daily at 1,030 hours for exactly 12 minutes, returning with tea and the smell of tobacco on his fingers. 3 weeks become 6. The autumn cold deepens, and Grisdale Hall's Victorian heating system struggles. Prisoners huddle in common rooms, wearing Luftwaffe uniforms under British-issued wool blankets. Von Werra's cell, a converted servant's bedroom with a window overlooking the woods, becomes his planning chamber. At night, he lies awake, absorbing the camp's rhythm. The crunch of boots at the midnight shift change. The perimeter patrol's flashlight beam, sweeping the tree line every 45 minutes. The snores from the next room. The clang of the boiler restarting at 0200 hours. The other prisoners reveal themselves through necessity and proximity. Hauptmann Klaus Braun, a bomber pilot from Hamburg, occupies a nearby cell. Braun possesses a talent for scrounging forbidden items. Civilian clothes appear in his possession, smuggled piece by piece through bribed guards or careless laundry supervisors. He speaks English with a convincing accent, practicing phrases under his breath during potato peeling duty. Von Werra recognizes useful skills when he sees them. Braun wants to disappear into British society. Von Werra wants something faster, bolder. Oberleutnant Manhard Voigt, a Stuka pilot with a pronounced limp from a crash landing, teaches von Werra the camp's invisible geography. Voigt has been at Grisdale since May, long enough to map every guard routine and security weakness. During evening recreation in the billiards room, Voigt quietly explains how the British rely on the honor system because they cannot imagine German officers behaving dishonorably. They trust that paroled prisoners will return from walks. They trust that officers will not steal, fight, or cause disruptions that violate the unwritten code of civilized warfare. This trust, Voigt says, while lining up a shot on the green baize, is a weapon waiting to be exploited. By the second month, death arrives not through violence but despair. Lieutenant Richter, a pale young reconnaissance pilot, stops eating. The British medical officer prescribes rest and sends him back to his cell. Richter lies in bed, staring at the ceiling with unfocused eyes, leaving letters from his mother unopened. Fellow prisoners try to rouse him with talk of victory or prisoner exchanges, but Richter turns his face to the wall. 3 days before Thanksgiving, orderlies carry him out on a stretcher, his body a faint shape under the blanket. Von Werra watches from his window as they load Richter into an ambulance. No one mentions him again. The empty cell fills 2 days later with a newly captured pilot who immediately joins the chess club, settling into comfortable captivity. Von Werra develops his own survival strategy, one built on movement and purpose. He exercises obsessively, running laps around the courtyard until guards tell him to stop. He practices English by eavesdropping on guard conversations, storing away accents and idioms. He volunteers for every work detail that takes him outside the main building, learning the layout of storage sheds, maintenance areas, and vehicle parks. The British interpret this energy as nervous temperament, failing to recognize reconnaissance when it wears a cheerful face. The camp's vulnerability reveals itself through small observations. The guards trust the head count system absolutely. They count bodies, not faces. If 140 men stand in formation, 140 are presumed present. The guards also trust the mail system. Letters arrive from Germany 3 times weekly. Von Werra notices the mail truck parks near the east gate for 20 minutes while the postal officer sorts bags. The guards at that gate focus on the truck's departure, not the prisoners nearby. December brings the first snow and a shift in camp dynamics. The commandant announces that cooperative prisoners will receive additional privileges for Christmas. Those who give their word not to escape can attend a special concert in the village hall, escorted but largely unsupervised. Von Werra watches fellow officers eagerly sign the parole agreement, trading dignity for an evening's entertainment. He refuses. Braun refuses. Voigt signs with a shrug, explaining that one must sometimes look compliant to plan effectively. On concert night, von Werra watches from his window as trucks carry singing German officers into town, leaving the camp with only 40 prisoners and a skeleton guard force. The turning point arrives on a grey afternoon in mid-December. Von Werra is assigned to a maintenance detail repairing a section of the mansion's slate roof. The work requires climbing scaffolding on the north side, which overlooks the service road connecting the camp to the main highway. While hauling roofing nails, he pauses at the top. From this elevation, he can see beyond the grounds. The service road curves through light woods for half a mile before joining the A591. He watches a civilian bus pass on the highway, heading north toward Windermere, stopping at a shelter barely visible through the trees. A corporal named Davies supervises the detail, more interested in staying warm than watching prisoners. He huddles near a brazier at ground level, drinking tea and chatting with civilian roofers. Von Werra positions himself at the roof's edge, ostensibly organizing supplies, but actually studying the landscape. The bus returns 40 minutes later, heading south. Another stop, more passengers. His mind calculates distances, timing, possibilities. A prisoner who reached that highway could board a bus before guards even knew he was missing. A prisoner in civilian clothes, speaking passable English, could ride to Windermere and catch a train anywhere in England. That evening, von Werra sits in the common room while others play cards and listen to a gramophone recording of Beethoven. Braun settles into the adjacent chair, his expression carefully neutral. They speak in low German, voices covered by the music. Von Werra describes what he saw from the roof. Braun nods slowly, already understanding. Voigt joins them, his limp pronounced as he lowers himself onto the couch. 3 men who have not mentally surrendered, discussing possibilities in a room full of comfortable prisoners who have. Braun details his growing collection of civilian clothing, scrounged through bribes and trades. It's not a complete outfit, but it's a start. Voigt describes the guard shift change at 1,400 hours, a 10-minute window when an overlap in the guardhouse leaves certain areas briefly undermanned. Von Werra thinks about the bus schedule, the head count system, the rooftop work details. The pieces do not yet connect into an actionable plan, but they exist. They wait for the right convergence of circumstances. The guards notice von Werra's improved behavior. He stops arguing about petty regulations and attends camp activities without complaint. He even joins a German-language newspaper reading group, nodding thoughtfully at discussions of sanitized war news. The commandant's aide remarks to Henderson that von Werra seems to be settling down. Henderson agrees, noting that even the troublesome ones eventually recognize Grisdale Hall isn't a bad place to wait out the war. Von Werra's cell becomes mission planning headquarters. At night, he sketches the camp layout from memory on scraps of paper, destroying them before morning. He memorizes bus schedules overheard from guards. He practices English phrases that would help a traveler buy train tickets or ask for directions. His determination solidifies from vague desire into focused intent. This genteel prison, with its Victorian comforts and honor system security, is not a place to wait out the war. It is an obstacle course, and he has begun mapping the route through it. By year's end, Oberleutnant Franz von Werra no longer sees Grisdale Hall as a country club or a prison. He sees it as a temporary delay, a problem with solutions waiting to be assembled. The British have made him comfortable, treated him with civilized restraint, and given him time to observe and plan. He recognizes their greatest weakness is their inability to imagine a prisoner bold enough to exploit their trust. The first escape attempt taught him that running into the countryside without preparation leads nowhere. The second attempt, when it comes, will be different. It will use their system against them. It will be audacious enough that no one expects it. He stands at his cell window on New Year's Eve, watching snow fall across the manicured grounds. Other prisoners celebrate with watered-down wine and singing. Von Werra calculates. The pieces are accumulating. The opportunity will come, and when it does, Canadian guards on a train will learn that Franz von Werra's most dangerous quality is not his courage or his flying skill. It is his absolute refusal to accept captivity, regardless of how comfortable his captors try to make it. Chapter 3. The Swanwick Dig. The spoon bent against frozen earth on the 15th of November 1940, 3 days after von Werra arrived at Hayes Camp in Swanwick. He knelt beneath the floorboards of Hut 10, knuckles raw, and understood that this camp would either make him or break him. The British had separated him from weaker, resigned prisoners and placed him among wolves. Major Rolf Schaper scraped beside him, methodical and silent. These were Luftwaffe officers who viewed captivity as a continuation of combat. Von Werra's pulse hammered. British intelligence had marked him as a Times Sonderhäftling asterisk, a special prisoner whose escape attempts warranted maximum security. His file documented everyone: the Grisdale Hall wire cutting, the fake injury ruse, the disguised walking attempt. Each recapture tightened the noose. The next camp would be worse, perhaps a stone cell in Scotland or a transfer to a Canadian wilderness camp where escape meant freezing to death. The window for action was closing. The trigger was cold, tactical assessment. For 72 hours, von Werra had watched the camp's routine like a predator. The guard patrols followed patterns set by exhausted soldiers on repetitive duty. The 1700-hour shift change created a 12-minute vulnerability when perimeter observation relaxed. The camp's proximity to RAF Hucknall, visible beyond the wire, transformed from taunt to opportunity. German pilots understood RAF procedures and aircraft and could forge convincing documentation resources ordinary prisoners lacked, but resources without action equaled slow death. Schaper's whisper cut the darkness. 20 centimeters down, clay layer, good for stability. Von Werra pressed his palm against the tunnel wall. This was different from previous, opportunistic attempts doomed by poor preparation. The Swanwick dig would be methodical, engineering and mathematics, 5 officers pooling intelligence, skills, and labor. The plan crystallized with the clarity that comes when inaction means certain death, but action offers the dignity of choice. The mental transformation happened in the tunnel's suffocating darkness. Von Werra shifted from imprisoned victim to tactical operator. Dining hall cutlery became excavation tools, theater costumes, disguise materials. Fellow prisoners became assets to evaluate for skills in cartography, forgery, or technical knowledge. The camp became a puzzle. His dormant engineer's training reasserted itself, calculating soil loads, ventilation needs, and concealment logistics for excavated material. The 4 other conspirators revealed themselves through behavior rather than words. In a camp swarming with guards and potential informers, verbal recruitment meant death. Von Werra observed who studied the wire, who volunteered for coal details to map guard routines, who possessed RAF knowledge from pre-capture briefings. Hauptmann Manhard Müller, ex-Luftwaffe intelligence, understood British identification protocols. Oberleutnant Wolfgang Claris had drafting skills from architecture. Lieutenant Karl-Heinz Schweizer had mechanical aptitude and infinite patience. Lieutenant Erich Böhm brought cunning and discretion. They never gathered as 5. Communication happened through chess games where moves conveyed information, staged arguments to pass objects, and coded references in theater rehearsals encouraged by the British. Von Werra became director of the camp's Christmas production, a role granting freedom of movement, access to materials, and a plausible reason for nocturnal activity. The British, eager to demonstrate humanitarian treatment, provided fabrics, paint, and wood. Every item was mentally catalogued for its dual purpose. Intelligence gathering became obsessive. Von Werra memorized the 17-guard shift with a stopwatch stolen during a staged medical emergency. The pattern was reliable. As the outgoing patrol reported to the guardhouse and the incoming patrol received briefings, observation of the main gate weakened. A 12-minute shadow fell over the sector between Hut 10 and the eastern wire, where visibility depended entirely on a predictable roving patrol. The window was narrow and unforgiving, but it was real. Weather patterns were critical. Heavy rain muffled sound but created sucking mud. Freezing temperatures hardened the earth for faster digging but created noise. Wind direction determined if coal smoke provided olfactory concealment. The optimal window would be December's freezing nights, with early darkness and holiday rotations potentially degrading guard alertness. The tunnel began on November 18th, beneath Hut 10. Von Werra and Schweizer removed floorboards precisely to ensure perfect replacement. The shaft dropped 1.2 meters before turning horizontal, aiming for the tree line 150 meters away. Calculations suggested a 3-week minimum for 5 men in 2-hour shifts. Reality was harsher. The clay layer, while stable, resisted their cutlery. Tools bent and broke, requiring careful theft for replacements. Disposal of excavated soil demanded scattering small quantities from their pockets during exercise periods across the compound. Ventilation became critical at 15 meters. The confining darkness consumed oxygen, leaving workers gasping. Böhm engineered a primitive but functional air channel using stolen metal cans and salvaged rubber tubing. It barely worked, but prevented suffocation. Von Werra spent hours in that blackness, scraping forward centimeter by centimeter, tasting earth. The physical labor was crushing, and malnutrition left muscles screaming, but the work provided purpose, transforming despair into concrete progress. By December 10th, 30 meters of tunnel existed. Von Werra's focus shifted from excavation to execution. The plan required perfect timing, disguise, and audacity. He would exploit his greatest asset, intimate knowledge of RAF procedures. He would not flee as a fugitive, but walk into an RAF installation as a Dutch ally and steal an aircraft. The plan's insanity was its protection. British authorities expected prisoners to hide, not infiltrate a military base. The Dutch pilot identity emerged from collective intelligence. Muller knew Royal Netherlands Air Force personnel served with the RAF, and British guards treated them casually. The uniform was constructed with military precision from theatre costumes. Von Werra's Luftwaffe tunic was altered, its insignia replaced by Dutch rank markings forged from paint. Schweizer, using pre-war expertise with official documents, forged the identity papers of Captain Van Lott on stolen British military forms. The psychological commitment solidified on December 15th, when Von Werra calculated the tunnel would reach the tree line by December 20th. 5 days left to finalize documents, rehearse a Dutch accent, and accept that this attempt would likely end in death, but it was the last realistic chance before transfer. The other conspirators felt the same mathematical certainty. The unspoken understanding hung between them like cordite smoke. Von Werra studied RAF Hucknall's layout from camp. The aerodrome sat 3 kilometers northwest. Intelligence from new prisoners suggested Hurricanes were stationed there for training. Their controls were familiar from Luftwaffe briefings, and their fuel capacity could reach continental Europe. Navigation would be dead reckoning across the North Sea, flying low to avoid radar. The odds were astronomical, but better than surviving continued captivity as a marked man. December 20th arrived with freezing clarity. The tunnel broke through at 14, during a football match organized as a distraction. Von Werra felt the spoon punch into open air. The 60-centimeter hole was perfectly concealed in the tree line. As Böhm widened the exit, Von Werra perfected his Dutch persona. At 17, the shift change created its 12-minute window. Von Werra emerged into the Derbyshire night, wearing the altered uniform and carrying forged papers. His transformation into Captain Van Lott was a survival necessity. His German accent vanished beneath a practiced Dutch inflection, his bearing shifting from Luftwaffe precision to RAF casualness as he walked toward Hucknall with the confidence of an authorized officer. The aerodrome's main gate materialized from the darkness. Von Werra approached the checkpoint, produced his forged identification, and explained in rehearsed English his need for urgent navigation training. The guards studied the papers with a thoroughness that stopped von Werra's heart. Seconds stretched. Then the barrier lifted. He walked onto Royal Air Force property, a free man for the first time in 4 months. The Hurricane sat on the flight line. Von Werra moved toward it, his purpose masking the terror in his nervous system. Ground crew, assuming his authority, asked no questions. Climbing into the cockpit, his hands found familiar controls. The engine was cold. Starting required ground crew assistance, so von Werra frantically improvised, claiming special mission authorization and demanding immediate preparation. The fabrication unraveled when a duty officer arrived, demanding to verify his orders. The papers, sufficient for the gate, crumbled under officer scrutiny. The Dutch accent failed. Recognition dawned in the officer's eyes. A German prisoner attempting to steal an aircraft. The audacity was so breathtaking it caused a moment's confusion before whistles blew and guards materialized. Von Werra raised his hands in surrender, tasting failure like copper blood. Recapture was swift and final. He was transferred immediately to maximum security, now treated as an extraordinary threat. The interrogation officer laid out the decision. Oberleutnant Franz von Werra would be transferred to Canada. Remote camps, wilderness isolation, temperatures that made escape suicide. The British solution to their most problematic prisoner was geographical impossibility. Von Werra absorbed this with strange calm. Canada was a new battlefield, with new variables and possibilities. Transport would be by ship or train, ships could be torpedoed, and trains had vulnerabilities. Distance was an obstacle, but also an opportunity. The British believed the Canadian wilderness would succeed where their camps had failed. They were about to discover that Franz von Werra did not recognize the concept of impossible, only the distinction between attempted and not yet attempted. The calculation began immediately. Canadian guards would be different. They would have files and warnings, but not the first-hand experience of their British counterparts, who now anticipated his methods. It was a fresh battlefield with fresh opportunities. The mathematics were simple: death by submission or death by action. He had already chosen. Chapter 4. The Leap from Train 2-4. The 21st of January 1941, near Smiths Falls, Ontario, Canada. Aboard a rattling POW train bound for a remote camp, Oberleutnant Franz von Werra knew this was his last chance. Outside the window, the Canadian landscape was an endless expanse of snow. The guards were complacent, lulled by the freezing temperatures and the vast distance from any border. As the train slowed on an incline near Smiths Falls, von Werra made his move. Feigning nausea, he motioned for his fellow prisoners to lower the window. While the guards' attention was diverted, he launched himself headfirst through the narrow opening into the night. He landed hard in a snowdrift, the impact stealing his breath as the train's taillights disappeared. He was alone, thousands of miles from Germany, with only his wits, a few dollars, and a desperate plan. Reach the neutral United States, less than 30 miles south, across the frozen St. Lawrence River. Von Werra lay motionless, listening. No whistle, no emergency brakes. The clatter of train 2-4 faded. They hadn't noticed. Not yet. He pushed himself upright, ribs screaming from the impact, and took inventory. His Luftwaffe uniform was intact beneath a civilian overcoat. In his pockets, $40 Canadian stolen weeks ago, a crude compass made from a magnetized razor blade and cork, and a forged identity card claiming he was a Dutch businessman named Albert Wieners. The forgery was amateur, but it might buy him minutes if questioned. Minutes could mean the difference between a cell and freedom. The plan had formed by watching the guards, noting their patterns and assumptions. They believed the winter itself was a guard. -20 degrees Celsius. Snow measured in feet, not inches. The Canadians thought distance and cold made escape attempts suicide. Von Werra had counted on that arrogance. 3 previous escape attempts in England had taught him that complacent guards were exploitable. The British had transferred him to Canada specifically because they couldn't hold him. Now the Canadians would learn the same lesson. Walking through knee-deep snow, von Werra oriented himself south using the North Star. He'd memorized the geography at Camp 20, studying newspapers and eavesdropping on guards. He knew the street. Lawrence River formed the border. Crossing it to the neutral U.S. meant claiming asylum. American internment was preferable to a POW camp and would mean eventual repatriation. It meant returning to the war, to his squadron, to the sky. The first 2 hours were pure survival. Von Werra forced himself into a ground-eating stride. Movement meant heat. Stopping meant death. His breath formed ice crystals on his wool scarf. Each inhalation burned. The landscape was featureless, white, broken only by skeletal trees and the occasional farmhouse. He avoided them all. Every farm meant dogs, and dogs meant questions he couldn't answer. His forged papers might fool a border guard, but not local police alerted to his escape. At dawn, exhausted and hypothermic, von Werra found a barn. He burrowed into hay bales and forced himself to sleep in 40-minute intervals. Sleep longer, and he might not wake. His last conscious thought was of the guards on Train 2-4 discovering his absence. By now, police across eastern Ontario were being notified. Roadblocks would appear. The net was closing even as he slept. He woke at noon to the sound of a farmer entering the barn. Von Werra remained absolutely still, barely breathing, as boots crunched past his hiding place. The farmer checked on cattle, muttered about the cold, and departed. 10 minutes later, von Werra emerged and resumed walking south. His legs were stiff. Frostbite had claimed the tips of 2 fingers on his left hand, turning them white and numb. He ignored it. Dead fingers were acceptable losses if they bought him freedom. That afternoon, he reached the railroad tracks running parallel to the Street Lawrence. This was the most dangerous phase. Railways meant people and witnesses, but walking cross-country would take days he didn't have. Von Werra followed the tracks, ducking into tree lines at the sound of approaching trains. Twice he saw police cars on nearby roads. Once, a constable stopped his vehicle less than 200 meters away and scanned the landscape with binoculars. Von Werra pressed himself into a drainage ditch. The constable looked directly at his position, paused, then drove on. Luck or poor eyesight, either way, von Werra lived. By the second night, he reached Prescott, a border town where the Street Lawrence narrowed to less than a mile. Across that dark water lay Ogdensburg, New York. America. Freedom. But the river presented a problem. The ice was forming but not yet solid. Open water showed in patches where the current ran strong. Attempting to cross on foot meant breaking through, and submersion in those temperatures meant death in minutes. Von Werra needed a different approach. He spent hours observing the border from concealment. Canadian Customs operated a checkpoint on the Ogdensburg-Prescott International Bridge. American Customs mirrored them on the opposite side. Pedestrians could walk across, but everyone was stopped and questioned. His forged papers wouldn't survive inspection. Vehicle traffic moved faster, guards waving through familiar faces with minimal checks. The solution became obvious. He needed to cross as cargo, hidden in a vehicle whose driver wouldn't question or search. On January 24, 3 days after jumping from the train, von Werra made his approach. He'd been watching a fuel truck that made regular crossings. The driver was a heavy-set man who completed the same route twice daily. At the Canadian checkpoint, guards barely glanced at his manifest before waving him through. Von Werra waited until the truck stopped for lunch at a Prescott diner, then slipped beneath the chassis and lashed himself to the undercarriage using his belt and scarf. The position was excruciating, but it would work for the 15-minute crossing. The truck started. Von Werra clung to metal pipes slick with ice, every bump threatening to dislodge him. Through the gap between road and chassis, he watched pavement slide past inches from his face. The Canadian checkpoint approached. Von Werra held his breath as Boots walked around the vehicle. A guard crouched, looked underneath from the rear. Hidden behind the fuel tank, the guard stood. A voice. "Go ahead." The truck accelerated onto the bridge. Wind screamed across the street Lawrence, ripping at Von Werra's coat. His fingers had no feeling left. He locked his arms around the chassis components and counted seconds. The bridge seemed endless. Then the truck slowed again. American checkpoint. Von Werra's entire body tensed. This was the moment. If American guards were more thorough, he would be discovered, returned to Canadian custody, and escape would become impossible. A voice in accented English. "Purpose?" The driver's reply. Muffled. "Delivery, same as always." A pause that lasted forever. Then, "Move along." The truck rolled forward. Von Werra had crossed the border. 2 miles into New York State, the truck stopped at a traffic light. Von Werra released his grip and dropped to the road, rolling into a ditch before the driver could register motion in his mirrors. The truck drove on. Von Werra stood on American soil, swaying from exhaustion and hypothermia, hands too numb to flex. He'd done it. 4 days from Smith's Falls, 3 escape attempts in England, 1 leap from a moving train, multiple near captures, and now he stood in a neutral country that couldn't legally return him to Canadian or British custody. He walked into Ogdensburg in late afternoon, heading directly for the police station. This seemed counterintuitive to anyone unfamiliar with international law in 1941, but Von Werra understood the technicality that would save him. Germany and the United States were not at war. As a German military officer, he could claim asylum and demand internment rather than extradition. The Americans would have to honor that claim under their own neutrality statutes. He pushed open the police station door, approached the desk sergeant, and announced in clear English, "I am Oberleutnant Franz von Werra of the German Luftwaffe. I am an escaped prisoner of war from Canada. I request internment under international law." The sergeant stared, then reached for his telephone. Within an hour, Von Werra was surrounded by state police, federal agents, and military intelligence officers. The Canadians immediately demanded his return. The British embassy filed diplomatic protests. But Von Werra had calculated correctly. American law in January 1941 prohibited extradition of military personnel to belligerent nations. The United States wasn't at war with Germany. The request was denied. Von Werra spent 6 weeks in comfortable internment in New York, while lawyers argued his status. The conditions were incomparable to any POW camp. Decent food, warm quarters, no forced labor. Most importantly, no bars. American internment was civilized detention, not imprisonment. On the 21st of April 1941, the State Department made its decision. Von Werra would be released to travel to Mexico, then South America, then back to Germany through neutral channels. The escape that began with a desperate leap through a train window ended with diplomatic victory. But the story doesn't conclude with bureaucratic triumph. Von Werra's final act was returning to war. By May 1941, he was back in Germany, celebrated as a hero, the only Axis prisoner to escape from Canadian soil and successfully reach home. He flew combat missions over the Eastern Front, shooting down Russian aircraft, until the 25th of October 1941. On that day, his Messerschmitt Bf 109 suffered engine failure over the North Sea. Von Werra radioed his position, then attempted an emergency landing on water. No trace of him or his aircraft was ever found. Train 24 continued running its route to northern camps for the remainder of the war. Security was increased. Windows were modified. But Von Werra's escape changed how the Canadians viewed German prisoners. No longer were they assumed passive. No longer was geography considered sufficient deterrent. The man who believed a frozen January night and 30 miles of wilderness wouldn't stop him proved distance meant nothing against determination. And for 4 days in 1941, one Luftwaffe pilot demonstrated that impossible escapes only require impossible courage and the willingness to leap into darkness toward a freedom that exists only as desperate hope against overwhelming odds. Chapter 5. The Frozen River. Late January 1941, Canada U.S. border. For days, Oberleutnant Franz von Werra moved through the Canadian winter, a ghost in a foreign land. He stole a rowboat, found it useless in the ice-choked waters, and abandoned it. Exhausted and suffering from frostbite, he finally reached the banks of the St. Lawrence River. Before him lay a treacherous expanse of shifting ice floes, the only thing separating him from the sanctuary of the United States. A manhunt was underway, but his captors would never expect him to attempt such a suicidal crossing. Under the cover of darkness, he began his perilous journey across the frozen river. He crawled from one ice sheet to another, the groaning ice, a constant threat. At one point, he fell into the near-freezing water, pulling himself out with the last of his strength. After hours of struggle, soaking wet and near death, he collapsed on the southern bank. He was in Ogdensburg, New York, a neutral country. Freezing water from his uniform dripped onto American soil. Von Werra lay there for minutes, breathing raggedly, unable to move. His fingers had lost all feeling. The toes in his stolen boots were blocks of ice. He couldn't stand. Behind him, the St. Lawrence groaned, ice floes grinding against each other in the current. He had crossed 400 meters of unstable ice in total darkness. Any moment could have ended with him plunging into water that would kill in minutes. The groaning was constant, the ice beneath him cracking and shifting with every movement. Twice more the ice gave way, and twice more he managed to pull himself onto solid sheets, his sodden uniform gaining pounds of frozen water with each immersion. The last fall had nearly finished him. He had gone under completely, the shock driving the air from his lungs. For seconds that stretched into eternity, he couldn't find the surface, couldn't orient himself in the black water. His hand found ice, found the edge, and some animal instinct took over. He pulled, dragged himself out, and crawled forward on his belly, spreading his weight, not caring if he lived or died, but unable to stop moving. Now he pressed his face against frozen earth and felt nothing, no triumph, no relief. Just the absolute limit of human endurance reached and barely surpassed. His body was shutting down, core temperature dropping. Wet clothes froze solid against his skin. He forced himself to his hands and knees, swaying. The lights of Ogdensburg glowed half a mile inland. Safety, warmth, but also authority. Immigration officials, questions, potential return to Canadian custody despite neutral soil. Von Werra made himself stand. His legs shook violently. He took one step, then another. The stolen civilian coat was a rigid shell. His pants crackled with ice. Each breath burned his lungs. Frostbite had already claimed his toes, he was certain, and possibly his fingers. He stumbled toward the lights, leaving a trail of ice crystals and frozen boot prints. Behind him, Canada disappeared into winter darkness. The border he had crossed was invisible, but he knew it was there. American territory. The United States wasn't at war. They couldn't legally return him to British custody. International law was on his side if he could reach authorities and identify himself as a belligerent officer seeking internment, not as a vagrant or criminal. He made it 200 meters before his legs gave out. This time he couldn't rise. He lay in the snow on Ogdensburg's outskirts, feeling consciousness slip away. The cold stopped hurting, a dangerous sign, hypothermia's final stage. He forced his eyes open, fixed them on the nearest light, and began to drag himself forward using his elbows. While Von Werra crawled toward sanctuary, Camp 21 Inches, Bowmanville, Ontario, erupted into controlled fury. The morning roll call revealed his 16-hour absence. In the frozen exercise yard, Commandant Colonel Robertson ordered the count repeated 3 times before accepting the impossible. The German pilot who had escaped from British custody once had done it again, from a moving train. In the middle of winter, in a foreign country where he didn't speak the language, the escape method became clear within an hour. Guards retraced the transport route, finding the smashed window on the train car and the spot where von Werra had thrown himself into a snowbank at high speed. The snow showed the impact crater and the scramble marks where he had run into the forest. That was the previous night. He had a 16-hour head start, and Robertson knew exactly how professional this prisoner was. Von Werra wasn't a desperate fool. He was a Luftwaffe fighter ace, decorated, trained in survival, and possessed of extraordinary determination. His previous escape from a British camp required multiple recaptures before he was sent across the Atlantic. Robertson didn't underestimate him. The colonel issued orders in rapid succession. Provincial police alerted across Ontario and Quebec. Royal Canadian Mounted Police notified. United States border stations contacted. Farm communities put on notice. Civilian authorities were asked to report any sightings, thefts, or suspicious activity. Dogs were deployed from the escape point, handlers working outward in expanding circles. The German had hours on them, but a man on foot in a Canadian winter couldn't cover unlimited ground, especially without proper cold weather gear, food, or shelter. The wilderness would slow and exhaust him. Robertson had seen exposure cases before. Von Werra might have made the initial escape, but surviving long enough to reach safety was another matter. The nearest American border crossing was Prescott, 40 kilometers from the escape point and heavily monitored. Von Werra would be spotted instantly there. The Street, Lawrence River, formed the border for long stretches, but in January it was a treacherous mix of ice and open water, essentially impassable without a boat. Von Werra would have no boat. Robertson sent patrols to the river regardless. If the German was fool enough to try, they'd find his body in the spring thaw. Meanwhile, the camp doctor reviewed von Werra's medical records. The pilot was malnourished from his Atlantic crossing and still recovering from previous escape attempts. Not in peak condition, not equipped for wilderness survival in sub-zero temperatures. The assessment was clear. Without shelter and food, exposure would kill von Werra within 3 days. Robertson doubled the patrols. Von Werra's frozen fingers found the door handle of a darkened farm building on Ogdensburg's outskirts. He pulled. Locked. He moved along the wall, found a window, and smashed it with his elbow. The sound was impossibly loud in the pre-dawn silence. He no longer cared. He pulled himself through, fell onto a workshop floor, and lay in the darkness. Warmer. Out of the wind. Not warm enough. Forcing himself to move, he found burlap sacks and pulled them over his frozen body. He found a workbench, crawled beneath it, and pulled down more sacks, building a nest of fabric. He hoped his body heat would return before shutdown became irreversible. He drifted in and out of consciousness as dawn approached. His body shook with violent tremors, a good sign. Shivering meant his core temperature hadn't yet dropped to lethal levels. He focused on breathing, staying conscious, letting his soaked clothes slowly dry against his remaining body heat. Footsteps. Voices. Morning activity in Ogdensburg. Von Werra lay still beneath the workbench. If discovered now, he might be treated as a criminal and returned to Canada before his status could be established. He needed to reach authorities on his own terms and present himself as a German officer requesting internment under international law. The pain of thawing tissue. He bit down on burlap to keep from crying out. His toes remained numb. Bad sign. The frostbite damage there would be permanent. But he was alive. On American soil. Beyond immediate recapture. He had hours before Canadian authorities alerted their American counterparts, and the search expanded across the border. Hours to dry out, warm up, and reach the authorities. He waited 2 hours beneath the workbench, letting his body recover. The shaking gradually subsided, his core temperature stabilized, and his clothes dried from stiff shells to merely damp fabric. When he finally crawled out, late morning sun streamed through the broken window. He stood, his legs held. His toes were numb but functional. He examined his hands, fingers white at the tips. Frostbite, but not severe enough to lose them, probably. He looked out the broken window at Ogdensburg, a small American town. Safety. He had crossed the Street Lawrence in darkness, survived hypothermia, and reached neutral territory. Now came the final challenge, surrendering to authorities before the Canadians could request his return. Von Werra straightened his frozen coat, ran damaged fingers through his hair, and prepared to walk out into America. He was Oberleutnant Franz von Werra of the Luftwaffe. He had escaped British and Canadian custody. He had crossed a frozen river that should have killed him. Now he would surrender as a prisoner of war to the only power that could guarantee his safety from recapture. He opened the workshop door and stepped into the morning light. 20 meters away, a civilian stared at the soaking, frostbitten man. Von Werra raised his damaged hands. He would end this escape the only way possible, by claiming the protection of international law and the neutral status of the United States. The manhunt was over. The incredible escape was complete. But explaining how a German pilot ended up in Ogdensburg, New York, in January 1941 would require every bit of determination he had left. Chapter 6. The Hero's Return. The 18th of April, 1941, Berlin, Germany. After crossing into the United States, Oberleutnant Franz von Werra surrendered to the police in Ogdensburg, claiming to be an escaped German officer. He became a media sensation and a diplomatic headache. While U.S. authorities debated his fate, German consular officials, aided by sympathizers, spirited him across the country to Mexico, then to Brazil, Spain, and Italy. Finally, on the 18th of April 1941, he landed in Berlin. He was the only German prisoner of war captured by the Western Allies to successfully escape and return to Germany during the entire war. The prisoner who jumped from a moving train in Ontario had made it home. But the final obstacle wasn't diplomatic maneuvering or ocean crossings. It was the Street Lawrence River itself. 3 days after his train escape, von Werra stands on the Canadian bank near Prescott, staring across 400 meters of open water. Ice chunks float past like broken teeth. The current runs at a daunting 6 kilometers per hour, strong enough to pull under a healthy man. He has been running for 72 hours, and his body is shutting down. The river looks impossible. Behind him, search parties are closing in. The barking of dogs grows louder. He has no choice. This is the line between capture and freedom. He must cross or die trying. The water temperature hovers just above freezing. Von Werra removes his outer coat, knowing the wet wool would drag him under. His hands shake so badly from exhaustion he can barely work the buttons, his fingers clumsy and thick. He keeps the inner layers, hoping for some insulation against hypothermia, and leaves his boots on. He will need them on the American side if he reaches it. The ice chunks worry him most. One solid hit to the head and he would drown. The current would carry his body downstream. Another failed escaper found frozen in spring. He has seen bodies pulled from rivers during training exercises, their blue skin and frozen expressions a sight he refuses to become. He enters the water at a 45-degree angle to the current, aiming for a point far upstream of his target landing. The cold hits like electricity, seizing his lungs. He can't breathe. His body screams for him to get out. Every nerve firing panic, but he forces himself deeper, water to the waist. The current pulls immediately, stronger than he expected. His legs go numb within seconds, not gradually. but instantly dead. He can't feel the riverbed under his boots anymore. He's walking on stumps that used to be legs. Deeper, water to his chest, the cold crushing his ribs. Each breath is work. His heart hammers against the compression. If it stopped now, he'd drown in 2 meters of water. A pathetic end for a Luftwaffe pilot. He pushes off and starts swimming. The current takes him immediately and violently. He aims upstream, swimming hard, but the river pulls him sideways and down. An ice chunk the size of a table crashes into his shoulder, spinning him around. Water fills his mouth. He chokes, spits, and tries to get oriented, but can't tell which direction is which as the current tumbles him, his heavy boots drag down. He kicks, but his legs are just blocks of ice attached to his torso, useless. He relies entirely on his arms now. Stroke, stroke, breathe. The cold is inside him, not just on his skin, it's inside his chest and skull. His thoughts slow. Stroke. Why is he swimming? Stroke. Something about America. Stroke. He can't remember. An ice chunk hits his head. Vision flashes white, then dark. He's under, water filling his nose and throat. He is drowning, 30 meters from Canada and 300 from America. Drowning in between, his hand touches something solid. Ice. A large piece. He grabs it, pulls himself up, and breaks the surface, gasping. He clings to the ice chunk, letting it carry him. His arms won't work anymore. He can't stroke, can't swim. Just hold on. The ice spins slowly in the current. He sees the Canadian bank, then the American bank, then Canada again, spinning, floating, dying slowly instead of fast. It's better than nothing. The ice chunk rotates and he sees the American shore, closer than before. Maybe 60 meters. The current is pushing him across while pulling him downstream. He might drift to the American side, or he might drift past it. He can't tell. His grip on the ice is weakening. His fingers won't close. They're frozen open. He hooks his elbows over the ice instead, trying to anchor himself. The ice tilts and threatens to flip, to dump him under. He redistributes his weight, every motion and effort, every thought, taking seconds to complete. The cold makes everything slow, hard. It is winning. 40 meters to shore. The current speeds up. He hears rapids ahead, white water crashing over rocks. If he goes through them on this ice chunk, he dies. The chunk will shatter and he will be pulled under, ground against rocks. He has to let go. He must swim. His arms don't work, hanging from his shoulders like dead things. He tries to move his right arm. Nothing. He tries the left. A bare flutter. Enough. He forces himself to let go of the ice, and the current immediately takes him. He tries to stroke, his left arm moving slightly while his right arm drags. This isn't swimming, just flailing, drowning with extra steps. 30 meters to shore. He can see individual rocks on the American bank. He can see the trees. Freedom is 30 meters away, and he can't make his body cover the distance. His boot hits bottom. Rocks. The water is shallow. The current drags him over them, scraping his knees through his trousers. He tries to stand, but falls, gets dragged, and tries again. His legs won't hold him. They fold beneath him. He crawls. Hands and knees in freeing water, crawling toward America. The current shoves him sideways, but in the shallows he can fight it. He crawls on, and his hands hit mud. American mud. He pulls himself forward, his useless legs dragging behind. 1 meter, then 5. He is on the bank, on United States territory. He collapses, face first, into dead grass and mud. He can't move, but he doesn't need to. He's across. He made it. He's free. The shaking starts 30 seconds later, violent convulsions racking his entire body. Hypothermia. He needs to move, needs warmth and shelter, but his body won't respond. He lies in the mud, shaking, his vision fading in and out. This is how he dies. Not in the river, but on the American shore, free but frozen. Better than a Canadian POW camp. He chose his death, and that counts for something. The shaking worsens, his jaw clenching so hard his teeth feel like they might crack. He can't control his own body anymore. The cold owns him completely. Voices, American voices. Footprints appear in the mud near his head, and strong hands roll him over. He tries to speak, but his jaw is locked shut from shivering. The hands lift him. 2 men, maybe 3. His vision narrows to a tunnel as they carry him. He feels motion, then sees a building. Warmth, blessed warmth. They lay him on a floor near a fire, but the warmth hurts worse than the cold. His skin burns as circulation returns. He screams, but no sound comes out. They cut his wet clothes off, wrapping him in rough wool blankets that feel like sandpaper on his raw skin. Someone forces his jaw open and pours scalding coffee into his mouth. It burns all the way down, but his core temperature starts climbing. They pile more blankets on him. The weight is crushing, but the warmth is life. Gradually, he stops shaking. He is warm. He is safe. He is in America. His jaw unlocks enough to speak. Ich bin deutscher Offizier, he manages. I am a German officer. The men exchange glances. One leaves while the other stays, adding wood to the fire. Von Werra can see him clearly now, an older man who lives near the river and knows what hypothermia looks like. The man who pulled him from death. Von Werra tries to sit up but can't. His muscles don't work yet. His legs feel full of broken glass. Frostbite. Probably lost some toes. It doesn't matter. He's in America, and he's free. The worst they'll do is intern him, then repatriate him. He's already planning. Get to a German consulate. They have to help. The old man returns with police. 2 officers in American uniforms stare at the half-frozen man on the floor. One officer kneels. You speak English? Von Werra nods. Escaped German prisoner of war, he says in careful English. From Canada. I claim political asylum. One takes notes while the other radios for instructions. Von Werra stays wrapped in the warmth. Planning. He gives them his name, rank, serial number. He tells them he escaped from a Canadian POW train 3 days ago by jumping while it was moving. They don't believe the train jump part until he shows them the deep, sprawling bruises covering his left side. They believe him then. Von Werra sleeps for the first time in 3 days, a real and safe sleep. He wakes in a hospital bed in Ogdensburg, New York. A doctor examines him. Recovered severe hypothermia, treatable frostbite on 3 toes, bruised ribs from the train jump, malnutrition, dehydration, and exhaustion. Nothing permanent. The doctor seems impressed he survived at all, noting that either the train jump or the river swim would kill most men. Von Werra did both. The doctor asks how. Von Werra smiles. I'm Luftwaffe, he says. We don't quit. Within hours, the media arrives. A German pilot who escaped from Canada to America is a sensation. Newspapers send reporters. Photographers take pictures. Von Werra, propped up in his hospital bed, tells the story, and they eat it up. The American public loves an underdog, even a German one. He is polite and charming, playing the role of the dashing airman perfectly. Behind the charm, he remains calculating. Every interview reaches the German consulate in New York. Every photograph proves he is alive and in American territory. The Germans will come for him. He just has to wait. The British want him back, pressuring the U.S. State Department. He is an escaped prisoner of war from Canadian custody and should be returned. The Americans hesitate. His legal status as an escaped prisoner from a warring nation seeking asylum in a neutral country was a murky diplomatic issue. While diplomats argued, Von Werra healed. His strength returned, his frostbite healed, his bruises faded. He gave more interviews, made more friends, and American opinion swung in his favor. He was brave and resourceful. The State Department delayed. The British grew frustrated. Von Werra waited. The German consulate acted. Sympathizers arranged papers and discreet payments changed hands. Von Werra was moved from Ogdensburg to New York City, then to El Paso, and finally across the border into Mexico. The Americans looked the other way. Germany wasn't the enemy yet, and one pilot wasn't worth a crisis with Britain. Von Werra crossed into Mexico a free man. From Mexico City to Rio de Janeiro, from Rio to Madrid, from Madrid to Rome, German officials smoothed the path. By the 18th of April 1941, he was in Berlin. The hero's welcome was everything propaganda demanded. Crowds, newsreel cameras, and Nazi officials lined up to shake his hand. He was taken directly to the Reich Chancellery, where Adolf Hitler himself pinned the Knight's Cross to his uniform and promoted him to Hauptmann. Captain Franz von Werra, the man who wouldn't surrender, who jumped from a train, swam a frozen river, and outsmarted the British Empire. He was exactly what Germany needed, a symbol of Aryan determination. Von Werra accepted the honors with the same calculated charm he used on American reporters, but he was already thinking past the ceremony. He had information, real intelligence that wins wars. His debriefing lasted 3 days. Intelligence officers questioned him about RAF interrogation techniques, POW camp security, guard routines, and escape methods. He provided details on everything he observed during his 5 months in captivity. The officers leaned forward when he described how British interrogators exploited isolation and comfort to extract information. Within hours, new protocols were drafted for German POW camps holding RAF prisoners. His escape wasn't just personal freedom, it was a strategic victory. The British captured a pilot. Germany got him back with an intelligence manual on their procedures. But freedom carries weight. He had escaped, reached home, and become a hero. Now he had to live with what he knew. Every guard who treated him decently would face consequences. Procedures would tighten, future escape attempts would be harder because he had succeeded. His victory was built on making freedom harder for those who came after him. He doesn't speak about this. Heroes don't question costs. They accept medals and smile for cameras. So he smiles, he accepts. He doesn't mention the nightmares of the St. Lawrence River, of waking up convinced he is still drowning, spinning in the current. He doesn't mention how loud sounds make him flinch like train wheels. The cost of escape isn't paid at the border. It is paid in every quiet moment afterward, when the body remembers what the mind wants to forget. Von Werra is home. Free, decorated, alive. But something stayed behind in that frozen river, something he would never get back. Chapter 7. The Legend of the 1941 present. After his triumphant return, Hauptmann Franz von Werra's story was used extensively by German propaganda. He married his sweetheart, returned to combat duty with the Luftwaffe, and was tasked with leading a unit on the Eastern Front. However, his ultimate fate was as swift as his rise to fame. On the 25th of October 1941, just 6 months after his celebrated return, von Werra's Bf 109 suffered an engine failure during a routine patrol over the North Sea. He crashed into the water and vanished. His body never recovered. The North Sea kept him, 27 years old, his escape already fading into the chaos of total war. In Germany, the propaganda machine that had celebrated him moved on to a roster of new heroes as the war ground forward. Within months, his name appeared less frequently in newspapers, then barely at all. By 1943, with Stalingrad lost and the Eastern Front consuming entire armies, one fighter pilot's escape from Canada seemed like ancient history. The German military archives, however, preserved his debriefing from April 1941. For 3 days, Luftwaffe intelligence officers had questioned him about Canadian security procedures, camp layouts, guard rotations, and the vulnerabilities of the rail transport system. The resulting 47-page report detailed vulnerabilities like poor lighting in boxcars, predictable guard checks, poor communication between rail stations, and how prisoners could exploit gaps in transfer protocols. The Luftwaffe filed it under restricted access, using some of its observations to brief pilots on escape techniques, but the full document remained classified. When Germany fell in 1945, the report disappeared into Soviet-occupied archives in Berlin, where it stayed for 43 years. The Canadian military, meanwhile, knew none of the specific details von Werra had shared with his superiors. They only knew he had escaped and that it could not happen again. In Canada, the response was immediate and institutional. The Department of National Defense launched an investigation within days of learning von Werra had reached Germany. The damning report, completed in May 1941, ran to 92 pages and spared no one, identifying 17 separate failures in protocol during von Werra's transfer. The guards who had escorted him received formal reprimands, and the officer who had approved the transfer of a known escape artist without additional security was reassigned. This prompted a complete overhaul of the POW transport system. New regulations, implemented by June 1941, mandated that prisoners be shackled during rail transfers, boxcar doors be secured with external padlocks, and guard details be doubled. Cars were now inspected at every station stop, and the type of window von Werra had exploited was sealed shut across the entire Canadian POW system. These changes were comprehensive and immediate, but also secret. Unwilling to publicize that a German pilot had outwitted their security, the Canadian government and military ensured the story received minimal press coverage. National security and national embarrassment conspired to bury it. In Britain, where von Werra had first been held, the reaction was more muted. He was one of thousands of Luftwaffe prisoners, and his initial escapes from British camps had been minor and quickly contained. The fact that he had ultimately succeeded from Canadian custody was noted in British intelligence files, but generated little discussion. The British had their own escape problems to manage, with a focus on getting Allied prisoners out of German camps like Colditz and Stalag Luft III, not dwelling on German successes. Von Werra's file in the Public Record Office sat undisturbed for decades, a collection of transfer documents and interrogation summaries that no researcher requested until the 1982nd. The war ended. Von Werra was dead. The story seemed to die with him. But among the German pilots who had known him, the legend persisted. Luftwaffe veterans returning from Soviet prison camps in the 1952nd carried stories of the man who escaped from Canada. In the community of former fighter pilots, von Werra's name came up at reunions. He became a symbol of success against overwhelming odds, the idea that a soldier could still fight even in captivity. Former Jagdgeschwader 53 pilots remembered him not as a propaganda hero, but as a comrade who made it home, also recalling the abrupt waste of his death 6 months later. In 1954, a former pilot's mention of the escape to a British journalist sparked a crucial question. How was it possible that the only German POW to escape from Western Allied custody and return to combat had been so thoroughly forgotten in Britain and Canada? That journalist was Kendall Burt. His curiosity led to the 1956 book Times, The One That Got Away*, co-written with James Leeser. The authors conducted extensive research, interviewing Canadian guards, railway workers, American immigration officials who had unwittingly helped, and surviving Luftwaffe pilots. They obtained von Werra's British interrogation records and pieced together a narrative scattered across 3 countries and buried in classified files. Published in Britain to considerable attention, the gripping escape story was also an embarrassment, laying bare how a single prisoner had exploited Allied security gaps. While the 1,941 reforms were in place, the public disclosure of the original failure was a private mortification for Canadian officials. The book became a bestseller in Germany, where von Werra was reclaimed as a hero of individual courage. In Britain and Canada, it sold modestly. The 1,957 film adaptation starring Hardy Kruger increased international awareness, but also cemented von Werra as more of a cinematic figure than a historical one, and the full documentary record remained inaccessible. The complete story of what von Werra told German intelligence did not emerge until 1988. That year, a researcher from the German military archives, Dr. Horst Boog, gained access to Luftwaffe intelligence files repatriated from Soviet archives. Among them was von Werra's 47-page debriefing. The document revealed he had not simply escaped, but conducted reconnaissance throughout his captivity. The report included detailed sketches of boxcar layouts, guard positioning diagrams, and assessments of railway station security. It showed that von Werra had noted the psychological patterns of his guards, identifying which could be manipulated. The clinical, professional debriefing proved his escapes were not impulsive acts of bravado, but calculated intelligence operations. Dr. Boog published excerpts in a 1989 article, fundamentally changing how specialists understood the story. He had not simply gotten away, he had completed his mission. In Canada, the story experienced a small resurgence in the 1992 when the Smiths Falls Railway Museum, located near where von Werra jumped, created a permanent exhibit on the escape. After being contacted by a local historian, the museum used access to information requests to uncover unpublished details, including the guards' names, the exact jump location, and the precise timeline of his unnoticed absence. The exhibit includes photographs, copies of transferred documents, and a section of the original railway track. It remains the only permanent public memorial to the escape in Canada, a quiet acknowledgement of the event that forced a complete overhaul of the nation's POW security system. The modern military legacy of von Werra's escape is not about inspiration, but about specific applications in intelligence and security training. At the Canadian Forces School of Military Intelligence, his case is a foundational example of system failure. Instructors use the 1941 investigation report to demonstrate how multiple small vulnerabilities can create a catastrophic breach. Students analyze the chain of failures, transferring a known escape artist without extra security, lax inspections, poor communication, to understand the core lesson, the institutional complacency that made his escape possible. His name appears in Canadian military doctrine on prisoner transport, and the regulations his escape prompted remained in force, with modifications through the Korean War and into the modern era. In post-war Germany, von Werra became a complicated figure. He was a skilled pilot and a determined escapee, yet he served the Third Reich and was celebrated by Goebbels. Modern German military historians treat him with careful neutrality, acknowledging his achievement while avoiding lionization. The Luftwaffe Museum in Berlin includes a small display on his escapes, focusing on their technical aspects rather than framing him as a hero. It notes his death and includes a photograph of his grave marker, a poignant error as his body was never recovered. The museum's approach reflects a modern German reluctance to celebrate Wehrmacht figures without acknowledging the context of the war. For American military intelligence, the escape became a case study in how POWs could continue to serve. Once its contents became known, von Werra's debriefing was analyzed by U.S. Army intelligence. The analysis concluded that von Werra's systematic collection of information proved that disciplined prisoners could function as intelligence assets. This assessment influenced the development of code of conduct training for American service members in the 1992. Instructors at Fort Huachuca reference von Werra's methodical work as an example of professional intelligence gathering under extreme constraints. a lesson illustrating that soldiers remain soldiers regardless of circumstance. The British military's engagement with his legacy has been minimal. Since his 2 escape attempts from British custody failed, and his real success came after leaving their jurisdiction, British authorities viewed the episode as a Canadian problem. The escape is mentioned only as a historical footnote in intelligence training materials. The British focus on POW history centers almost exclusively on the heroism of Allied prisoners. An achievement like von Werra's runs counter to that narrative and thus receives little institutional attention. His family preserved what little they had. Von Werra's wife, whom he had married during his brief return, was notified of his death in November 1941. Widowed at 23 after only 6 months of marriage, she never remarried. In 1945, she fled west from Soviet-occupied territory with their infant daughter and settled in Bavaria, rarely speaking about her husband. When Kendall Burt contacted her in 1955, she granted a single interview but declined further involvement. She died in 1987. Their daughter, with no memory of her father, learned his story from the book and film. In 1991, she described him as a stranger she knew only through archives, noting the propaganda version of the invincible hero bore little resemblance to the man former comrades described: serious, professional, and solitary, driven by duty rather than adventure. Franz von Werra remains the only German POW held by Western allies during World War II who successfully escaped and returned to combat. This unique achievement ensures his story's survival, even as his motivations remain obscured. The archives hold the facts, but not the internal experience of a man who jumped from a train into darkness, crossed a frozen river, and walked to freedom. The record shows his extraordinary actions, but it cannot show why they mattered enough to risk everything. His name is carved on the Luftwaffe memorial at the military cemetery in Berlin-Gatow. The inscription gives his rank and dates, nothing more. Every year, on October 25, a small group of historians and veterans places a wreath there, not to celebrate his escape, but to mark his loss at 27, 6 months after he made it home. The memorial is silent about what he did in Canada. It records only that he served and died. For most who pass it, the name means nothing. For those who know, it means everything a single soldier could do when capture was supposed to end his war.